Hey everybody, Craig Warrack here and welcome to The Workshop. My plan is to use these videos to give those who are interested more detail about my customizing process, and here in the first one we're going to be taking a more in-depth look at my Doctor Strange custom. If you're watching this video, then enough people gave the thumbs up to the short showcase of the figure I did here on my channel, so thanks to all you guys. Oh wait, you're one of the guys who gave me a thumbs up? Well, you get a special thank you then. I'll catch you in the alley round back after this, Mr. Generous. Anyway, I'm going to be breaking this video down into 3 stages that match the 3 stages of my customizing process. Stage 1, inspiration. Stage 2, research. And stage 3, customizing. So let's get cracking with inspiration. Doctor Strange has been one of my favourite characters since my early teens. I've been aware of the character from his appearance in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends in the early 80s when I was still in primary or elementary school, but he didn't really click with me until I was a super nerdy teen and got into the Marvel Superheroes role-playing game. This thing was like Dungeons and Dragons and had a rule book that explained the powers and abilities of loads of heroes and villains, and that was when I was blown away by how powerful and important Doctor Strange was to the Marvel Universe. Hot on the heels of that was my favourite comic series, The Infinity Gauntlet, in which he played a major part. So both of those things added up to me becoming a big Doctor Strange fan. But despite my fandom for the Doctor, even I wasn't really a fan of his look. Classically, Doctor Strange has been floating around for decades with questionable fashion sense. Now, I can accept that he can't do much about the cloak and the amulet, as those are specific magical items. If he wants to be able to fly, then he's going to have to put on that huge cloak with a ridiculous collar, and if he wants to be able to wait until the last moment to solve any and every problem by using the Eye of Agamotto, then he's going to have to put on that pimpin' amulet that even Mr. T would think was perhaps just a little bit too much. I accept that. But let's take a look at the rest of his look. Girl. That flouncy belted blouse, sleeves tucked into your gloves, and the figure-hugging footed leggings? Nuh-uh. There's no excuse for that. So, in 2006, along comes the Doctor Strange miniseries The Oath, written by Brian K. Vaughan, and beyond it being not only the best Doctor Strange story I've ever read, but artist Marcus Martin redesigns Doctor Strange's costume, giving us a much more everyday looking character with jacket, slacks and shoes. His jacket still keeps the design of that blouse thing and has some flair with the collar and sleeves, but it looks like something someone might actually wear, and it reminds us that while we often see a lot of the strange in Doctor Strange, we don't often get to see a lot of the Doctor. And that, I think, is the key to why I like this look so much. It captures the look of the magician, but also balances that with the look of the Doctor. It tells a story about this character just with the visual, and that's something I love in character design, visual storytelling. On top of all that, I've always felt that Doctor Strange's look was influenced by my favourite actor, the legendary Vincent Price. Indeed, Stephen Strange's middle name is Vincent, and that can't just be coincidence, right? Certainly, when you look at character design sketches for The Oath, it's clear to see that Martin was drawing inspiration from Price's look. This gives Strange a little less of a superheroic appearance and makes him very distinct from other heroes, being slightly older and more experienced. And just as an aside, here's a look at some of my Vincent Price fandom. You can see, obviously, I've got Blu-rays of his movies there, but I've also got a comic in the background of the Mask of the Red Death, and also here's a very early custom figure I made of Vincent, showing its age a little now, admittedly. But anyway, the look from The Oath is the look I've gone with for my custom here. And it's a look I've been wanting to capture for years. Long-time viewers of my channel may remember me making a previous Doctor Strange. There's a video about it here on my channel. Oof, way back in 2011, eh? In that video I talked about how I wanted to make Strange's Oath look, and I tried to make a posable cloak from latex, but failed disastrously. Still, even a failure is valuable in being a lesson learned. Going with a cloth solution seemed to be the next best thing, but I wasn't experienced enough using cloth and didn't really think it worked well at this scale, kind of thinking the lack of shading and highlighting on it always made it look a bit cheap and doll-like, to be honest. I ended up going with a different look for that custom of Strange, his Joe Madureira look. God, I hope I'm saying that right. And that figure still stands on my display shelves today. But here I am almost 6 years later with, I feel, enough experience, practice and confidence to finally attempt my favourite look for Doctor Strange. So, with my inspiration all explained, let's take a look at the research I did for this figure. I felt like I knew the source material really well, so didn't have to look too far for reference, but something I always like to check out is how others have adapted a character into figure form. So let's take a quick tour of what's gone before, paying particular attention to how they've handled the Cloak of Levitation and the Eye of Agamotto, as these are the things I feel make or break any Doctor Strange figure. Let's start with the first Marvel Legends Doctor Strange, released in 2005. This is Strange in his classic look, blouse, muscly tighted legs and all, and right off the bat, this guy is absolutely swamped by his cloak. It's made of a soft rubber, but it's still very heavy. While it's removable and can move out of the way to get at the figure underneath, it doesn't have any wire or support in it to help it stay out of the way. That results in it pushing his arms down when you try to raise them. It's a noble attempt nonetheless, and you can see what they were trying to achieve. That's always a cool thing about Toy Biz. No matter how hard they failed, you could always see that they were at least trying. The eye is sculpted onto the cloak and isn't very well defined at all. It's not the prominent costume element I feel it should be, but this is me looking at this figure from today's standards when it's more than 10 years old already, so I can't be too harsh on it. Moving up the timeline, we come to the next Marvel Legends Doctor Strange that has the cloak and the eye, released in 2016 to coincide with the Doctor Strange movie. This Doctor Strange appears in a more modern black and red costume, but is just a slightly altered re-release of an earlier figure, but with an accessory this time. Lazy. The cloak is made from a harder plastic than before and is sculpted out of the way, back over his shoulders, letting his articulation work much better. It's not very dramatic and comes across as more of a cape than a cloak to my eye though. And here's the Eye of Agamotto, sculpted again as part of the cloak. A little better defined than before, but still not getting the attention I feel it deserves. The Eye of Agamotto is as important to the character as Captain America's shield is to him, I feel, and it's just not getting much attention. Pfft, lazy ass figure anyway. Next, oh yeah, here's the movie Doctor Strange from the same wave as old Lazy Bones from before, and is obviously styled after the character's look in the movie. Well, it's actually styled after concept art for the movie, hence the different hairstyle and detail on the cloak clasps, but it's more or less there. This cloak looks much more, well, cloak-like. It looks billowing and is sculpted from plastic to show all those folds and the texture and design of the material. The cloak hangs asymmetrically with one side flung back over his shoulder and the other falling forward. Obviously this means he has good articulation on one arm and sod all on the other. Ugh. The eye is a separate piece here, no doubt due to its importance in the movie. God, that Infinity Stone stuff made me want to puke. But I digress and don't want to detract from how this is a step forward for the eye. It's nicely rendered and is an actual separate accessory, allowing for more and better display options. Let's take a look at the Marvel Select Doctor Strange, released at the end of 2015. Again, this is classic Doctor Strange with a really detailed sculpt, and man, to make those leg muscles look like that in those tights, he must be clenching real hard. You're gonna have a prolapse, Stephen, relax. The cloak is well done here, again in a soft plastic and sculpted so it doesn't inhibit his articulation too much. It's a nice compromise between form and function. The eye is nicely sculpted too, and it almost seems like it should be removable, but nope, it's glued on there pretty tight. We also get this version of the eye, which has a little peg hole in the back, like they were planning for us to swap it out for the closed one, but the glue stops that from happening. Anyway, it comes on this dinky little chain that confuses me a little, but maybe it's an engagement gift for Wong or something. Sorry, I mean Clea or Night Nurse. No, I don't. Stephen and Wong forever. And looking a little into the future through my mystical orb of Agamotto, sponsored by Google, there's the SH Figure Arts Doctor Strange, which looks like the best rendition of movie Strange and has Bandai's usual cape solution of whacking hinges and articulated flaps on things, which admittedly usually looks great when posed, but to me feels a little bit weird when you're actually playing with the figure. Oh, not that I play with figures, of course, he said in a dark helmet being caught with his dolls kind of way. And then finally Mezco's 1/12 Collective Doctor Strange, which goes with a cloth solution for the cloak, which seems to be wired and posable. It's a nice solution for the cloak, but obviously this figure is about 4 times the cost of the Marvel Legends ones. I don't know, I'm just not feeling the figure as a whole. It seems quite restrained shape-wise, but kind of over-designed in detail. All those lines all over his tunic and tights kind of make me think Under Armour has redesigned his outfit for maximum scientifically proven performance enhancement purposes. But it's always tough to judge something before you have it in hand, but the design choices made here, well, they're choices. So yeah, lots of different approaches to Doctor Strange, his cloak and the eye, all with lots of good lessons to take away, particularly plastic. No matter how soft, it doesn't seem to be the way to go with a fully articulated figure unless you can create separate articulated panels. And that Eye of Agamotto has just never been done well. It needs some special attention. Right, so let's get down to how I made this custom. First things first though, I know people are going to ask me about paint rub. How do you prevent it? Well, the clue is in the name. It happens when paint rubs. So to stop it, you take out the rub. Take the figure apart, sand the joints down, make sure they don't rub. It's a lot of boring, unglamorous work and graft, but it's pretty fundamental. No matter how well you seal paint or put super glue over the top, if it rubs against another surface, then it's going to scrape any paint on that surface off. You may be wondering what sandpaper to use, and well, it depends on the plastic you have, so buy a selection pack from a model shop or order it online and see what works best on the type of plastic you've got in front of you. I just thought I'd deal with that bit up front. Anyway, starting off with base figures, I wanted Doctor Strange to have that slender look he has in The Oath. The suited Marvel Legends bodies were a good place to start, but the trousers on these are a little baggy and don't carry that nice, straight, neat silhouette that the design requires, so off I went looking at other suited bodies, trying to find someone slender, and look who popped up. It's the SH Figure Arts Tuxedo Mask. He has those anime proportions with legs for days, but that neat straight silhouette was exactly what I was after. I had some worries about the knees only being single jointed, but in practice the knees have exactly the same range of motion as the Marvel Legends knees, so I was good to go. I used the upper body from the Marvel Legends Chameleon figure because the base blue plastic would be helpful when it comes to minimising paint rub, removed the jacket and dremeled a hole through the bottom of the torso to see how the peg from Tuxedo Mask's waist would fit in there, and to be honest it was totally by accident, but the peg just popped right in there tightly and I didn't mess with it any further, just pure luck there. Worth noting though was that Tuxedo Mask's waist was much slimmer depth-wise than Chameleon's, but as Strange's jacket tails would be hanging down over his waist, hiding that, I didn't need to worry too much about it. It's also a little wider, so I dremeled away the side a bit so it wouldn't make his shirt tails fly out at the side and break that neat straight visual. Just a little heads up in case anyone is planning on creating a suited character using this recipe, the waist size is not an exact match. Tuxedo Mask's knees were a little ugly when they articulated. One thing about some of these import figures is that they're not afraid to have bulbous articulation points sticking out, but maybe I'm just biased as I've been looking at Marvel Legends for too long and don't notice their flaws as easily as I notice other figures. Either way, I covered them up as much as I could with a little sculpting and dremeling. I popped the Hulkbuster Wave Doctor Strange head on him to check his height, and as you can see in this shot, he was a little too tall. That's all owing to the anime proportions of the legs, so I cut about half an inch out of his thigh and he seemed to draw more in line with other Marvel Legends. I dremeled around the collar and shoulders, added some sculpt to that area, as with the jacket removed the shoulders didn't line up with the arms so well, and I dremeled off the shirt detail on his front. I also took my Dremel to that head sculpt, shaving down that heroic jawline and removing the hair detail to give me a bit of a head start when it came to making him look like an older gent when it came to the sculpting. I also created additional hands for him using Astro Doctor Strange's hands as a base, shaving down the wrist pegs so that they could pop in and out of the wrist socket easily, then using fingers from other figures, notably Superior Spider-Man. I love a good gestural hand on a figure, and Doctor Strange's hand gestures are a huge part of his look, particularly in The Oath where his fingers seem stylized to be longer and slender, accentuating his gestures. So yes, I chopped them off other figures and glued them onto the hand, angling them slightly, taking wedges out of them, bending them, and gluing them into new positions until I was happy with them. I had decided to go with a magnetic solution for the Eye of Agamotto and for some other parts of the figure, so I dremeled out a hole in his chest for a magnet. For this project I used neodymium, I hope I'm saying that right, magnets. I believe they're also called rare earth magnets, but either way I think they work great for customizing and I've used them in several past projects. I order them on eBay. There's tons of sellers that sell them and they come in all shapes and sizes. I used two different sizes for this custom, one just over half a centimetre and one just under half a centimetre. I find that anything larger is difficult to fit into the small areas used in customizing, and anything smaller just doesn't have quite as strong a magnetic attraction. And just quickly jumping ahead to the finished thing to illustrate what I did with the magnets in the main figure, there's one in the palm of his hand, one in his forehead, one in his chest, 3 on his back, and 1 on each of his shoulders. So once I've dremeled a hole for the magnet, I just glue it in there and sculpt over it. But I still needed a solution for his collar, cuffs, and the tails of his jacket. As I said before, the tails of his jacket were going to hang over his waist, and as the waist would be pushing against them when it rotated, they couldn't be rigid. The sculpting material I use, milliput, is very rigid. It's not flexible at all when it's cured, but fellow customizers who do great work with hair on figures pointed me towards a sculpting material called Procreate. Usually when you use an epoxy putty, you mix half of one compound with half of another, and it cures to a stone or plastic-like hardness. Procreate publish on their instructions that by mixing different ratios you can get a more flexible final product, and this proved to be exactly what I was looking for, so I ordered some online and it worked a treat. In these work in progress images, the yellowish areas are my sculpting work done with milliput, and the grey areas are done with Procreate. I find Procreate to be a challenge to sculpt with, admittedly, and to have a very short working time, so I tried to limit where I was using it. It's important to note that Procreate does have limits to its flexibility. Push it too far and it will break, but it's useful in these situations where you just need the sculpt to have that little bit of give. I also used Procreate for the collar of the Cloak of Levitation. I didn't want to have to figure out a sewing pattern for that crazy shape, so I set up some wires around Stephen's neck and sculpted the collar over them. Beyond the flexibility that Procreate provides, the wires buried in it allow the sculpt to articulate a little. I also put magnets in the base of the collar so they would attach snugly to those magnets in his shoulders and back I mentioned earlier. I then went back to sculpting the Eye of Agamotto a little, and this was a tough time. What you see here is a thin layer of milliput on top of the magnet, and me, very carefully and ever so gently, placing individual balls of nail caviar into it in a circle. Nail caviar is, as the name suggests, used for nail art and comes in loads of different colours and can be ordered online. I just slightly wetted a sculpting tool and used it to pick up the individual balls and place them on the sculpt. My hands are notoriously shaky, not quite as bad as Stephen's, but this still involved a lot of deep breaths and patience. So with the sculpting all taken care of, magnets all over the place, and no other way left to procrastinate it, I had to get started on the cloak. The cloak had 5 main challenges: getting the right material, making it articulated, attaching it to the figure, painting the fabric, and adding the trim. With previous experience from working on Doctor Doom, Swarm and Pennywise, I knew that I wanted to use satin. I picked up exactly the same kind of satin I used for Pennywise, but this time in red. While I usually just buy stuff online, I find that you have to buy fabric in person. Only in person do you get a good idea of how it looks, feels and handles, so I got mine at a local fabric shop and cut it to shape with very sharp fabric shears. For the shape, I just googled cloak patterns and then downsized everything to Marvel Legends scale, essentially dividing all the measurements by 12. As soon as I'd cut the satin, I hit the edges with a tiny amount of fabric glue, which prevents fraying, and then I got to sewing. Just using a needle and thread and my old shaky hands, I folded the edges over on some floristry wire and did the smallest stitches I could to secure the wire in there. I did this for all the edges of the cloak so that I would have full control over how it looked when posing. And once it was all sewn up, I used some super glue to attach it to the collar and sculpted over that messy glued edge with Procreate to better hide the join. And because I had already built magnets into the collar and figure, they took care of holding the cloak tight to the body. A little extra step I took was because while I wanted the cloak to be able to be posed dramatically, I also wanted it to be able to hang at rest over his shoulders for a more brooding look. I pushed the cloak down over the figure's shoulders and pinched, sewed and glued the folds that were created round the back so that the cloak became almost tailored to the figure's silhouette. So the next challenge was painting the cloak. Now, I don't know if I'm the only one who feels this, let me know in the comments I guess, but well, here's the thing. When we use plastic or a sculpting material or whatever, we paint it so that the recesses are darker and the highlights are lighter. It tends to be why figures with a wash and a dry brush look more detailed. I feel that even with cloth you need to add shade and highlights to it to make it merge better with the sculpted figure beneath, otherwise it looks a bit, well, like a doll. I understand that the recesses and highlights in cloth vary because it moves, but well, what I'm saying is I think cloth in a figure looks better when it has variation in tone and colour to it. Anyway, ranty rant. So I added some subtle variations in tone with my airbrush and continued that colouring onto the collar. Notice that for extra contrast I shaded the area of the collar immediately behind Stephen's head a much darker colour than the edges. I feel it just helps to add that bit more drama to the look of the figure. And that just left the trim to deal with. My original plan was actually for this to be fabric too. I bought some gold ribbon from the fabric store and I'd thought about stitching black lace on top of it, but that was just never going to work. So I just had to bite the bullet, mask off the edges of the cloak, spray it black and gold, and then get in there with my trusty Citadel paints and add in that fine detail. Like the sewing, this took forever to go along the full length of the edges, making gold shapes and black outlines, but I'm happy I went with that rather than that ribbon and lace thing I had originally planned. God, can you imagine? And so that was the cloak all done, which left me with just painting to do, and this was fairly straightforward. I sprayed the figure with black primer first of all. People ask me, Craig, why did you use black? And my answer is, why, you got a problem with black? You racist? No, actually, I have 3 colours of primer. I've got black, I've got grey, and I've got white, and I don't know, I just chose black this time. It meant I had to do a few more coats of paint in some areas, but meh, whatever. I live streamed me painting this figure here on my YouTube channel, so you can go check those out. I actually find it kind of hard to focus on the painting and keeping it in the camera frame and asking those questions, but I got there in the end. The paint job was pretty straightforward. And while I don't usually seal my figure, I feel that model paints always have a sealant built into them. I did give this guy a spray with Vallejo varnish at the end of the day. Oh, and I think only those who were looking super closely during my showcase video will notice that Strange's paint job actually changed during filming. I originally had Strange with these plain orange and yellow hands with the dots he has on his gloves limited to his forearms, but when I lined him up with my older custom, I was like, damn, I really like how the dots extend onto his hands. So I took the hands back to the workbench and gave them more dots. And before calling it a day, let's just touch on his accessories. The magic effects are made from acrylic rods heated up with a heat gun and bent to crazy shapes, and then these little clear balls glued to them. Special no prize to anyone who spotted these little blue balls as being from the Marvel Legends Havoc energy effects. I cut them from those effects and painted them with Tamiya clear yellow, which changes the blue to a green, of course. The little hoop that fits over Strange's wrist is from the repulsor effect that came with Civil War Iron Man, again painted with yellow to make it green. The Book of the Vishanti, which made everyone send me a message on Instagram asking if I can make them one, and the answer is always no by the way, is made from lots of little printed pages. I googled printable spellbook pages or printable Necronomicon pages, and these are what turned up. I printed them out in contact sheet style and then dyed them with a wet tea bag to give them a nice colour. Then I bound them all individually using an ancient technique. Nah, who am I kidding? I glued them onto pages of this toilet and shower catalogue. I had this lying around the house, so I just cut out a section to make a small book. I didn't genius this idea up, by the way, I wish I had, but I just looked on YouTube for how to make miniature dolls books or something. There are a bunch of videos showing people using magazines and all sorts. I put a magnet in the spine in the same way as I did all the other parts. I then covered the outside of the book with a textured paper towel, coated it in PVA glue, painted it, and did a little bit of fine card cutting to get that symbol, and there we go. The book's done. Oh yeah, and the book also has a wired posable bookmark. It's just a piece of satin with a wire glued into it. So there we go, that I think is how I made this guy, and here he is. I'm really happy with how he came out, as this is a figure I've wanted for a long time, and I had been procrastinating making him due to the difficulty, and also in the hope that an official good Doctor Strange would arrive, but alas no. Anyway, thanks for sticking with me through this inaugural episode of the workshop, taking a look behind the scenes at my Doctor Strange custom. And thanks particularly to HazeKevin77 on Instagram for helping me out with naming this hopefully ongoing series. I certainly hope to make more, and before you ask, I don't know what my next custom is going to be. I guess I have to go back to my inspiration stage and see what shakes loose. Anyway, until next time, pour on the power. Bye bye.